Dave Holland, welcome.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk today. And since I got the opportunity, I just want to thank you for all the work you've been doing with Pacific Rex. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for a while. When I first started years ago, especially on your website, I looked onto it and I'm like, man, this is a good resource for any Pacific War historian or enthusiast, especially with the air. And always, if I have an air issue with an airplane, or I'll say, oh, was that a wreck, or was that a crash, whatever, I'll just go straight to your website and bang, there it is. And it's a link straight to the air crash. So once again, for those that are not familiar with your work, especially your website, go to that. So yeah, once again, I want to thank you for your efforts, and especially recovering some of the lost planes and lost remains. So thank you once again. But yeah,
Oh, well, thank
Chris.
you very much, Dave. But today, this show's about you. So without further ado, I want to congratulate you on your book that is forthcoming. It's out now, Guadalcanal's Longest Fight. Is this your first book? Is that correct? You've never written any books before? You're a first-time author, is that right?
Yeah, this is number one, first time.
Wow. Well, congratulations. As we record this, the book's release on Amazon is October 30th, but you were just discussing before that people are already getting the book. That's awesome. And I guess it's right on time for the Marine Corps' birthday coming up soon. So congratulations.
Thanks.
I was blown away reading this book because, as you say in your foreword, that the battles on the Matanikau are kind of overlooked and forgotten, mainly because on Guadalcanal today, they're largely in the urban area of Honiara, the capital of the Solomon Islands. And what captivated me so much about your work is this is, I think, the first book, really, aside from the official histories that are divided up into the whole campaign, that covers specifically this one battle that, as you say, was the only place that was fought over repeatedly, with 7 different battles or engagements, and tremendous casualties on both sides, the Americans and Japanese. So congratulations on finding an importantly overlooked topic on Guadalcanal and writing about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was one of those subjects that I knew there was a reason to do. I think initially, and I can go into how I started or the origins of actually how this book came to be. If you want, I can start from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'd love to hear about that. But first, tell me about yourself. You are an American. I detect a little accent different than mine. Begin, Dave, by just sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, and of course, you have the ultimate credential. You were a Marine.
Yeah, well, some arguments that I am still a Marine, but I don't like to say I'm a former or a Marine now because I just don't want some drill instructor come knocking on my door, or some old the sergeant major come knocking on my door and say it's time to get out of your bed and get out of your rack and it's time for a working party or time to go PT. So yeah, I'm a former Marine for 8 years. So yeah, so I'll just put a disclaimer out now about my accent. One guy said he didn't know if I'm from Alabama or Adelaide. So I've been in Australia for 30 years. So I don't have an accent. Other people's have an accent, but yeah, I'll try to slow my speech down. But if I can throw Australian in there, then the next minute it switches to Appalachian, Northeast Alabama. So yeah, anyway, bear with me.
Well, I understand you loud and clear. You have an Australian accent as well. How is that? What brought you to Australia?
Okay, initially I was here. Also, I did the Marines for 8 years. So initially I came here in 91, 92. I was part of the embassy program, the Marine embassy program with the Department of State. So I do 2 posts, one good one, one bad one. So Havana, Cuba, I'll leave it to you to work out which one that was. So after Havana, I could go anywhere in the world, basically. Top 5 post. I picked Canberra as number 1, and I won't go into detail why I did that, but as a young single Marine, you could probably work it out. So I was at the embassy there. And then I got out I went back, did another year and a half in the Marines, got out. Then went back to Alabama where I grew up, Australian wife. So I forgot to say I left Australia with a wife, so Australian wife. And so I think wife, so that's Australian. accent. Then we decided to come back to Australia. So we come back to Australia, went into the state police, then eventually went into the Australian Federal Police. So that's what brought me to Australia. And this is going to lead us up to how I got involved in walking the battlefields of Guadalcanal. So
excellent. Yeah. Well, I guess like many from the 1st Marine Division, you came to Australia after the battle and left with an Australian wife. So that's amazing. And in your Marine service, you were an embassy guard, which of course is a very prestigious duty. And you were posted in 2 very different and interesting companies. And I imagine that work was quite interesting, fulfilling. And I read in the book also that, of course, all Marines are riflemen. You were also, in the combat arms, scout sniper and a machine gunner yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, so I did 8 years in infantry. My primary MOS, which is job skill in the Marine Corps, is it was 0331, which is machine gunner. And then after doing that, I was selected to be a scout sniper, and I went to scout sniper school. I did that for a number of years. I was in 1-5, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. So that battalion always has a little special place in my heart. And then when I was writing about that unit in the 1st of November, and you'll see in my book, that really struck hard and home because they suffered a lot of casualties. But yeah, and then I was picked to go embassy duty. Then when I came back out, I was put into a heavy machine gun platoon as platoon sergeant. Same thing John Basilone did. So yeah, and when I walk in the fields, and I have a bit of connection, when I write about Basilone and Mitchell Page and the others, yeah, that really strikes it home. And plus, when they talk about setting up machine gun posts and all that, I really know what they were doing.
Absolutely. Well, having walked the battlefields as you have, reading your book, it is truly written by an author who understands both the history but also the military craft, and I really sense that reading your work, so kudos and great job. And before we begin getting into the book, there's one more person to, I guess, remember and shout out, a mutual friend of ours who your book is dedicated. Can you tell a little bit about John Inennis, who he was, how you met him, and kind of how he was a pioneer for all of us battlefield explorers, and especially for those interested in Guadalcanal and Tulagi?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So it takes me back up to when I was with Australian Federal Police. So part of the Australian Federal Police at the time, and they still to this day, they had peacekeeping missions over in the Solomon Islands, or specifically Guadalcanal. So in 2009, I said, well, I'm going to jump on this track because, once again, I'm military history. Ever since I was like 6 years old, learning how to read. It's all about military history. I decided to go into Marines when I was 6. And then every Marine, you get taught in basic training and throughout the Marine Corps career about your history. And Guadalcanal was a real big one in Marine Corps history, as you can imagine. So, yeah, can I get a chance to go to Guadalcanal on a peacekeeping mission? Yeah, I'll go in a heartbeat. So in 2009, I went for 4 months. And there, I really scratched the surface just on the battle itself. I was walking around as much as I could. I was doing operational missions, but we're walking the ground that everything occurred on. I'm doing patrols. We're doing, the same thing these guys are doing. But John Inennis at the time was an Australian expat, and he'd retired. He'd moved back to Brisbane, Australia. But he would come over like once, twice, maybe 3 times a year to do week-long tours. So I was there when John came to do one of his tours. So I hooked up and did the a day tour. He was there for a week. He did multiple tours over a week. But I did his 1-day package tour and went with him and everything. And and I took John around in my vehicle, and John and I got to talking. And then I spent the rest of the week with him, one-on-one. And he would walk me through and show me different things. And the thing about John, being there for 20 years, he had that opportunity. He was like the go-to man, and he had the opportunity to walk the ground and spend a lot of research. But I think one of the best things about John, these veterans would come back, and John would take these veterans around. He was getting that firsthand information directly from the veterans. I mean, it got so detailed that he could walk up, say, for example, Hill 27, and the veteran would go, wow, there's my foxhole. Wow. There, and just that whole connection. Anyway, and after that tour for 4 months, I left, and I was always in contact with John. And so we used to exchange correspondence quite a bit. So John taught me quite a bit about walking the battlefields. And then in 2011 and 12, I'd go back for short deployments. And then 2018 to 2020, I went back for a 2-year stint. And by that time, John had passed. I'm friends with John's family, and you'll see in the book that I was received. I don't say I received his collection of material, but I'm the caretaker of a lot of his material. And then John's material, his resource collection was pretty good. He had a lot of firsthand accounts, unpublished accounts, and stuff you won't find in any archives. And I mention that quite a bit in the book in the end. And I used a bit of direct research. So yeah, John was a big inspiration for me. And that's hence why I dedicated the book to him.
Awesome. Well, although John passed away September 1st, 2018, long ago, I can imagine him right now saying, "Dave, good on you. Here, and let's get an SB." And for those who've been to the Solomons, they know what that means. So now getting into the book, one of the interesting features of this battle that your conclusion talked about is that the Matanikau Front, the battlefield area, was only really miles in area, 2 miles by 3 miles. It had 7 major battles and engagements there, tremendous casualties on both sides. Something like 30% of the American Guadalcanal casualties were in this small area. For the Japanese side, the estimates are, of course, just estimates, but they also suffered terribly. Can you tell a little bit about the physical geography of the Matanikau, where it was, and the important events that happened there?
Yeah, so Matanikau is 5 miles west of Hendersonville to the perimeter. So the Matanikau River, fast flowing, typical south to north, fast flowing river you'll find on Guadalcanal. Probably empties into the north coast of Guadalcanal. Is generally at the time before the battlefield or before the battle, there was a coastal track. Basically, a coastal track or government track was the official name, and it serviced all the coconut plantations. It was a series of hundreds of acres of coconut plantations through there. The only place you could cross the Matanikau mouth was at the sandbar. Sandbar is roughly about 100 yards long, 100 yards wide, about 50 to 75 yards, or long and about 70 yards wide.
And I'll bring up a photo now of the Matanikau River mouth looking south. The north coast of Guadalcanal is there. And where was Matanikau Village? On the west side, correct?
Yeah, so Matanikau Village was a pre-war village, comprised about 24 huts. It was on the west side, about 250 yards due west, right on the coast. The sandbar, while I was getting at the coastal track or the government track, the only place it crosses Matanikau was at the mouth, at the sandbar. The sandbar generally at low tide. And you'll find along those rivers they didn't have permanent bridges. That was where you would actually cross. So that becomes very important in the campaign in the early stages. That mouth of Matanikau. So there's the only place you could go really to bring trucks, artillery, and you'll see later, tanks across. It's the only place you could cross the river. Mm-hmm. So you really can't ford the river. It's fairly deep in most places. Depends on the time of year with the rainfall. So you'll see, if you have the map up, you'll see the ridges, the typical low coral ridges of Guadalcanal. Now the ridges naturally are coral and they're bare with kunai grass. That's the reason, because the coral ridges have small topsoil or little topsoil generally on the top. So only little trees and kunai grass will grow. But in the thick ravines the jungle is very thick. It has streams. And you'll see from an aerial photograph of Guadalcanal, especially during the war and now, that the hills are bare, but then you'll see that thick vegetation below. And then on the coastal, like I said, it's nice and flat. The coastal plains, either swampy with the mangroves, or they're filled with kunai grass or coconut plantations, as you'll see pre-war. And that was the place where you could build the strategic gold, I said in the book, is the airfields, or the strategic gold of the Pacific War.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the famous photo that many people may know of the Matanikau are the relics, the wrecks, the hulks of Japanese tanks that were disabled on the sandbar. That, of course, is an action described in your book. It happened in the third
23rd.
battle of the Matanikau, and we've got that picture up now. Can you describe that picture? And probably it's an image that most people may be familiar with, and what that's a view looking northward out towards Savo Island in the distance, correct?
Yeah, so it happened during a Battle of Henderson Field. It happened on 23rd of October. So that was supposed to be the diversionary attack under a guy called Major General Sumiyoshi. So at the same time, the 2nd Division, as you remember, is heading south, cutting through the jungle of Murayama, and his division is cutting south to come up through the perimeter and hit Henderson Field. So Sumiyoshi's group was going to be the diversionary attack on the mouth of the Matanikau. And I was pretty lucky because I was working with a Japanese historian, so it's all in Japanese, of course. He gave me the history of the 1st Tank Company, which is the tank unit that it did it. And it has a few personal accounts in there. There's only 30, I think 34 actually survived. But yeah, there was 12 tanks in the company. I've got the captain's name in there. Escapes me right now. It's in the book. But when they landed, what they were going to do was they were going to use them to force across the mouth of Matanikau, followed by the remnants of the 4th Infantry Regiment. They were going to have infantry support with them. So a few days before, they wanted to fill out and test the marine defenses. Plus also, too, and you won't find it in the other book, and this is from the personal accounts of the captain, he wanted to test the sand. Because you wouldn't think about that. You go, hold on a minute. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You're going to drive a tank across. You're going to make sure it's not going to get stuck or bogged down. So they made some feeling attacks to test the defenses and plus to see if they could actually go across the mouth. And then you'll see in the book there was the first time they came out, one of the Marine 37 millimeters hit them at about 165 yards off and damaged the tank, and they pulled back, and then they get hit with some mortar fire. So on the night of the 23rd, so Captain Mieta, I think that's his name, he went back to the to his general and said, look, can we just have the infantry attack first, and then once they punch across the mouth of Matanikau, then we can follow. We can do our famous filleting tactics that the Japanese love, to straight down the road and attack the communication line and go straight to the airfield. And he goes, no, that's not the plan. You have the honor of leading the assault. So he goes, yes, sir. And they led the assault. And on that night, there was 9 tanks attacked across, and that's the holes. Only 1 made it. And I have a good account in there because you always, in most books, there's an account, it's fairly common reference of PFC Champagne, and he puts a grenade in the dolly wheel of the tank, and it blows up, the tank backs up, and one of the Marines, self-propelled 75 millimeter half tracks, and I only had 1 there, fired a few rounds point blank into it, which is all true. But the thing about my Facebook site, which was great, I had a lot of contact with veterans' families. I had one guy reach out to me. He said, my dad was in that same squad, machine gun squad as Champagne, and here's his account. And he allowed me to have that account. It was such great, but he allowed more detail into Champagne's, who earned the Navy Cross that night, or awarded the Navy. When people get up me when I say earned, but anyway, he later received a Navy Cross. So Champagne puts it in there, and the dolly wheel blows up, and he actually talked about what dolly wheel he did it, but he mentions that Champagne's ears was blown out. So anyway, so that puts back to the whole importance of the Matanikau. So early in the early part of the campaigns, Vandergrift, the division commander, recognized how important that mouth of Matanikau was. So for the Americans to push the Japanese off the island, if they ever decided to, because everything was about the perimeter, they had to go past the Matanikau. For the Japanese to take the Henderson Field, they had to go past the Matanikau. So both forces were going there. So in October, the Japanese main assault, Operation X, was going to be a reinforced division assault. A combined fleet was coming down, the largest fleet since Midway, going to draw the Americans out. It's going to be the decisive battle. So what the Japanese planned to do before that was to seize the east bank of the Matanikau There, they were going to establish a artillery firing platform, as they called it, bring up the 150 millimeters, the 100 millimeters heavy guns, and they knew they had to suppress the American air power because the Japanese ruled the night, as in they would bring in supplies and reinforcements by these fast destroyers. But during the day, to bring in those larger transports, they couldn't get in and get out before daylight came. And during the day, the Americans ruled, controlled the seas due to the air power and unsinkable aircraft carrier of Guadalcanal. So the Japanese said, look, if we need to bring these large transports in with a large amount of supplies, a whole nother regiment, more tanks, more artillery, but we need to do it in one big hit. But to do that, we need to suppress the airfield. So what we're going to do is we'll establish an artillery firing base on the east bank of Matanikau. There we'll be only 5 miles away, and we'll just start smashing and pounding American air power, right? And then once we do that, we'll bring in a bombardment force. The night before, we're going to bring in all these transports in. We'll just finish up the remnants with this bombardment force of 2 battleships. And leading up to those days, we'll have a massive amount of air raids. We'll just clean them up. And then that will allow us to bring all these heavy transports in to offload everything. We'll have already established the east bank of Matanikau, which is a good pushing off point. We don't have to fight over the Matanikau. We already have that. So we'll push off the infantry regiments straight down there. We'll have the armor, and we'll just push straight through. And that leads us to the third battle of Matanikau, which is, to me, the most important battle. And I really go into detail, which a lot of historians and authors really don't concentrate on how that impacted that battle. Because, spoiler alert here, the Americans win that battle. But what they did was, when the Japanese, it was 2 offensives at the same time. The Japanese had an offensive set for the 8th of October to take the East Bank. They had small forces over there, but they're going to send a whole regiment over. And the Marines at the same time knew they had to take the Matanikau. So on the 7th, they did their assault. So they beat the Japanese to the punch. But they beat the Japanese in that battle. But what that did, it denied the Japanese that East Bank of Matanikau. So they did bring their artillery in, but they had to fire their artillery from 10 miles away at Kukumbona. And I have a Japanese account of one of the battery commanders, and no one's ever made this connection before. They said, yeah, we could hit the airfield, under the quote, the pistol peaks, the collective name for all the heavy artillery. We could hit the airfield. We're firing at 10 miles, which is, for the 150 millimeter howitzers, the max range. So what that did, he said, we had to use a massive amount of gunpowder to fire that. But what that did, that weakened the breeches of our guns. And he only fired 80-something rounds, and their guns were gone.
Wow, that's amazing detail. And yeah, it's such a fascinating component to the battle. And I guess another thing to mention, having your experience on Guadalcanal, is the distances involved. 5 miles, 10 miles. It sounds so small to the Western world, but that was really life or death, that distance, and how pivotal the Matanikau was of being right at that key juncture. But that is fascinating about the artillery and the effects of firing with maximum charge and the degrading that it did to the guns. Incredible.
But what it did too, because as we know, their whole plans, that's why the third battle of Matanikau is so important. Their whole Japanese plans, it just threw, I'll call it Australian, a spanner in their gears or a wrench in their gears. So they had to go back to the board, and they said, well, okay, we can't, we're going to have to fight. Even our offensive can't start. We have to fight across the Matanikau, and our forces will be treated even just getting to the starting off point. So that's when they come with this big, bold move, trying to leverage some of the Japanese strengths of speed, shock, and surprise. We'll just go through the jungle, thick jungle, and come up from the south. So that led to the Battle of Henderson Field. So that was why that third battle of Matanikau was so impacted to me. It's the turning point of the land campaign. And I go into a lot of detail in my book why I think that is. But that really threw the Japanese out.
Incredible. And for those watching, most people rightfully associate the Marines with Guadalcanal, but your book and the fighting on the Matanikau in the later battles did also include the U.S. Army. Is that correct? Can you mention a little bit about them and their involvement in the later battles on the Matanikau Front?
Yeah, so this is not just a Marine Navy fight, like you said. I try to debunk some of the myths, and one of the myths I wanted to really, really hammer was the quote mopping up by the U.S. Army. There was no mop up on Guadalcanal, and we'll see when it comes to late November, early December. Both forces are spent. They're offensively spent, and both forces are waiting for more reinforcements to both continue the offensive. The Japanese never gave up. They were always going to go on the offensive. They were just waiting and holding actions. And same as the Americans. One of the other misconceptions is when the 1st Marine Division left, there was no other Marines there. Yeah, there was a lot of Marines there. The 2nd Marine Division officially came in January, but the 2nd Marine Regiment and the 8th Marine Regiment was fighting hard there. Now, yeah, the U.S. Army, there was another thing from my Facebook page by speaking to veterans' families, and they said, well, my grandfather, my father was there in the Army, but we never hear what happened. He was in 182nd Regiment or the 164th or the 35th Regiment. We don't really know what really happened. They was just mopping up or cleaning up, or when my grandfather would hear it or my dad would hear it, he'd get really mad. Yeah, and then when I talk about the November is the bloodiest month of the whole land campaign for the Americans. So we're talking about the 5th Battle of Matanikau, which you won't see written in books, but I've kind of named it the 5th Battle. I've seen some Army veterans did mention in a couple of accounts the 5th Battle, but that was the November the 17th to the 23rd. And we'll see, that's the first really all-Army attack. And I go into a lot of detail in that about the first planning. Even though the 1st Marine Division was there, they kind of let the Army run with it. And then the 8th Marine Regiment was there. And then we look to the January battles. And to me, that January battle, the fighting along the Point Cruz line, because I talk about Matanikau Front, that's Matanikau River, but the Point Cruz lines, which is 1 mile west. So the Point Cruz line, after that 5th Battle of Matanikau, when it came to a draw, and they were basically stuck there on that Point Cruz line, that became 6 weeks of what resembled World War I. That was no man's land. No fort, they couldn't go back or forth, either forces. So both were just spent on that holding line. So it went down to like daily artillery, mortar bombardments, night raids, sniping, machine gun fire, and it was just misery on that line. The 164th Infantry suffered heavily there, and the 8th Marines suffered heavily, especially on the 23rd. And then when the January attacks, that's why I call them the innovative 8th Marines now. That was just so amazing. That really amazed me, and it will amaze the readers. In fact, the historian John Hoffman, who wrote my foreword, if you know John's retired Marine colonel, is a very well-known Marine historian. Then when he retired from the Marines, he became the chief historian of the U.S. Army. And hard taskmaster, John, but he really gave me some good pointers. And John didn't put his name to anything. It's not well researched. That was the whole deal. But John was amazed at what the 8th Marines did. He says, I never read this material before, what the 8th Marines did in January, the innovative 8th, I call it. They were developing tactics that we'll later see in the Pacific War, innovative tactics. For example, they were integrating their engineers into squads. They were putting 50-gallon drums of gasoline or petrol, if you want to be in Australia, 44 liter. Put ENT charges in them, and once they were taken out, they could gain to the rear the igloo coral pillbox, as they call it. They were blasting them. They were putting shotguns in per units. They were bringing up 37 millimeter anti-tank guns and using them point blank. The half tracks with a 75 millimeter. They would fire canister rounds because they couldn't find some of these Japanese bunkers. They're well hidden. They'd fire canister rounds at vegetation, and using those canister rounds to shred the vegetation to expose these Japanese pillboxes, and the next rounds, anti-tank rounds, bang, 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 straight into them. But yeah, they were coming up with some good techniques. And the same with the U.S. Army. I mean, I don't really talk about the fights on Mount Austin, but the U.S. Army's involvement is really highlighted here that you won't find in any other material.
That's right. And one comment you made before about it being almost a World War I front The interesting part about Matanikau, I always thought, was the Japanese bunkers. And you mentioned how well concealed they were, how strong they were. That is a feature that many people don't really associate with Guadalcanal, these sort of bunker fortifications. And you talked a bit about the efforts that were required to clear them. But also it was a point of necessity for the Japanese, right? They had to dig in because they were also within American artillery range, being attacked by aircraft on a near daily basis. That is another fascinating part of the story.
Yeah, these Japanese defenses were great, and I talk about it a lot in detail on the Point Cruise Line, how they set them up. Unless you really walk that ground, especially in the ravines between hills 84 and 83, 78, and that ravine there, which that ravine, I call it the ditch. The ditch there. And the ditch is very prevalent too, and I go into a lot of detail about the ditch there, the stream. But yeah, the Japanese are very innovative. They set up reverse slope positions, and I'm going into a lot of detail what that means. To avoid that direct fire from the Americans, they would go down about 10 yards or 10 meters on the reverse slope, and they would dig the bunkers there. And you couldn't, any supporting arms, say, example, machine guns or rifle fire, couldn't engage the bunkers like covering fire. The Japanese were giving up their I guess, their approaching distance. They didn't care. So when the Americans would pop over, say, at the top of a ridge, they were silhouetted. And the first time they seen the Japanese bunkers, they were 10 yards away, and they just caught a whole blast of machine gun fire in the face. And what the Japanese was doing too in that ravine, very innovative. They were digging in bunkers that the fire inflated down the ravine. So that was one of the things that the 8th Marines did in January, because they knew in that November attack, they attacked cross-compartmental. That means from one ridge to the other, and they were getting smashed with inflating fire. And the 164th Infantry found that too. So the 8th Marines said, well, what we'll do in the January attack, we'll attack on the upper parts of the ravine to take out those inflating fire, and we'll just attack an echelon and move down to the right. And they tried that, and then it didn't work, but they had a hard time. But yeah, what the Japanese would do, they would base everything on those light machine guns, that Top 96 and 99s, were some of the best light machine guns, based on that Bruno or Bruno design. They were very fast firing machine guns, and Americans really respected those. So they would base 2 or 3 machine guns, and they would base all their defenses around the machine guns. And the riflemen and the knee mortars, the top 19 or 86s, grenade launchers, we call them, but knee mortars, nickname, they would support those machine guns in the areas that wasn't covered by machine gun fire. And obviously it's supporting, I think it was like 4 or 5 machine guns, also directly supporting each other. So yeah, it was a hard nut to crack.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible stuff, and certainly both sides fought with distinction to the very end. And I think we don't have enough time to cover every one of the battles and engagements today, but you've given an amazing sort of overview of the battle. Thank you very much. Dave, the next thing I want to highlight in the book is the maps, the visuals that this book includes. And I'll pull up one just as an example on page 79. Any student of military history, you look at the same maps that came out in the Marine Corps or Army official history. They're kind of hard to read, and they've already been seen before. In your book, you created original maps that accompany just about every chapter of the book, and page 79 is one example. Can you talk a little bit about the process of making these maps, researching them, and drawing them to this level of detail and specificity?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a map guy. I love maps, and this one too, because the battlefield, they talk about hills all the time, so you're definitely going to need a reference for maps. So I wanted to make sure I get it right. And then most of the maps I've seen, in fact, all the maps I've seen, some are great. Like if you're looking at John Miller's, his U.S. Army's, there's only one book been written, Army 49, but that was the Green Book series, U.S. Army Official Histories, and it has some beautiful maps in there. So, but sometimes all the maps I've seen in these books, even the Miller's maps, and left out certain things, like the one log bridge. One log bridge is very prevalent in my book and very prevalent in the campaign. So the one log bridge, I think Richard Frank, my friend, the historian, basically said it's mainly two logs. It wasn't one log, but it's basically, it was two logs laid side by side. I go into a lot of detail, 2,000 yards upstream. And that was a crossing point the Japanese had made. But the location had been lost to modern history. And then after you read a few of the accounts, you start connecting the dots. You read some of the, and I've got a few of the original maps. The one log bridge, I know exactly where it is now. And then there was something called the East-West Trail, Missouri Road, the Japanese called it. And you won't see them in any of the books. It's in this book here. And the Missouri Road, or the one on the East-West Trail, comes straight down and crossed the one log bridge and continued on. And once you look at if you're on the ground looking at the terrain, you go, well, where would a road go? Where would I walk? You go, this makes perfect sense. Where the crossing point is, a small part of the river, it basically goes from ravine to ravine. So it's
incredible.
No problem.
Yeah, we just had that map up to see that. And yeah, these are features that people have read about. And it's pretty amazing to think that the locations haven't been nailed down until now, until your work. And again, that's another great feature of this book. Another one of the maps I wanted to highlight on page 29, again, in the absence of any official map, you did a great job, and your map creator, Peter, this is an example of a World War II era photo where you've overlaid the events and positions. So can you talk a little bit about that, using an aerial photo to kind of create a period map that didn't exist?
Yeah, I like this one. So this was actually taken on the 18th of August. As you can see the date on the side, and plus the Matanikau village is still existing there. So I know it was burned on the 27th of August, and I talk about that in my book. So we know exactly when this was done, and plus, once again, the aerial photo has it dated. Unique thing about this was taken basically during a battle. It's amazing. You obviously you can't see any troops in there, but they're there. So there was never a map on the first battle of Matanikau. It's kind of looped over in our first battle of Matanikau. There was kind of a payback for the Getchy when they wiped out the original garrison, because the original garrison fled to the Matanikau. That's another thing I point out in my book, and that led to why the Marines are there, because they're trying to find the original garrison and lock them down. And you'll notice there too, I got the Getchy patrol. I talk about that in my book. That's the infamous, depends on which side you are. The patrol where Colonel Getchy and his 25 man patrol, Marine patrol, were landed and was basically killed, except for 3. And that's the location of where they landed. And I talk about that in the book. But yeah, I wanted to break down the first battle of Matanikau, and we just overlaid it on an existing aerial photograph from actually the day of the battle with the units annotated in. So I'm looking down, just looking at my book now. I'm not what.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's an incredible treatment, and I really appreciate seeing that. And again, for those people that are familiar with Guadalcanal, that have read everything out there, your book is really exciting because there's new visuals. They just look great, and I applaud you and your Peter for doing really great visualizations. Another one to talk about, page 24, is a great then and now picture. We all love then and now. In the lower right is the historic photo, the insert there, 1942, the river mouth, the sandbar, and then the larger photo behind is the present day in 2023. Talk a little bit about that. And of course, for people looking at this, they may say, hey, that doesn't look the same. Why has this changed? Why is it different from 80 years ago, Dave?
Yeah, so the biggest thing, after the battle, the land campaign, because the air campaign continued, so we're talking about February 1943. So almost immediately after that, within weeks, America started turning the area into a large logistical and training base. And then you had the air base. You had 6 airfields in Guadalcanal. You definitely would know that, but some of the viewers might. So it started turning into a large training logistical base. So what they did, the CBs and the engineers went in, and what is the yard, which is we're looking at there, they started concreting over everything and building the infrastructure. And there you go. And that maintained, and it built up more until 1945. The original capital of the Solomon Islands was in Tulagi, which is 20 miles to the north. that was the British colonial capital. So after the war, when the British came back in to resume control, they looked at this ready-made, medium-sized American city, basically, and said, okay, we'll just make the capital there. So in the process, a lot of the battlefield, most of the battlefield, had been built over. So that's why it is. You can see on that photo, when I was talking about the barren hills and the thick jungle, you can see it there. Unfortunately, I wanted color photos, but the publishers went to the grayscale, so it doesn't come out as good as it would look in color. But yeah, that's then and now. So that's a massive environmental change. And then now that the population is growing, they're just moving up into the hills because the coastal strip is narrow. So they're moving up narrow. Now they're pushing up into the hills. So that's one
incredible.
of the Matanikau is much too. And I discuss that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how, 80 years, things have changed on Guadalcanal. The population today is much larger. The battlefield is really built over right immediately afterwards, as you said, by the Americans in the sort of base era of Guadalcanal. But, again, to highlight another aspect of the book, you had the professional privilege to work there, to see and participate in Guadalcanal's present-day history. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is the Matanikau Front like today? What do people see when they go there? Of course, there's a more modern bridge over the Matanikau River, but paint a picture of what it's like today and what, if anything, remains to be seen from the World War II era.
Yeah, so that's I'll talk about it in my introduction, how the area is not really known even to American war tour groups, because I've mentioned in my introduction how I was there one time and I heard an American war tour group basically saying that what happened around here, and the tour leader said, "Oh, not much happened around here. Let's go to Bloody Ridge." That's when I was very shocked. I was like, "Wow, this." I looked out for the hotel I was at when I was meeting my friend. I said, "Well, there's a Medal of Honor happened over there, and a Medal of Honor happened over there, and thousands fought here, and there's still at least 100 Americans probably under our feet right now and still missing to this day." And I thought, this is what's going on. Yeah, because the whole area is, like I said, been built. There's no monuments there. There's no signs that said this is where Puller was engaged here. This is where the 164. This is when a Medal of Honor was earned here by Casemate or Monroe. Well, there's a monument from Monroe, but the wartime remnants are gone. There is the great, which I think the beautiful memorial, U.S. Memorial on Hill 73, the old Hill 73, and it's maintained by the American Monuments Commission, Battlefield Commission. So that's maintained quite well. And if anyone ever visits Guadalcanal, I'd say go straight to there if you don't see anything else, because it's designed. It's in a beautiful position, and it's designed. It's well preserved and protected, and it's designed for if you don't get a chance for a person to go there. And it explains the whole campaign, air, sea, and land. Great views over the Iron Bottom Sound. But yeah, the bridges, the wartime bridges, the location of one of the wartime bridges, what they later built in November, December, is still there. But the Mouth Matanikau, I wouldn't go to the Mouth Matanikau today because it's probably more dangerous than it was in 1942 with the.
What do you mean by that? Why is that?
Pollution, because it turned into a squatter camp right at the mouth, and it's pretty nasty there. You definitely have to have your shots before you go in that place. Yes, and unfortunate, but that's just the way modern, I guess, society is. They have to live.
Is the remains of the one Japanese tank still visible in the waterline?
No, I think 2014 had some major floods there. There used to be one tank, like you said, was still there. Because in November, I talk about it in my book, in mid-November, most of the holes were blasted to pieces. To prevent infiltration by Japanese snipers and machine guns. They blew that up when the 8th Marines pulled back over, but they were left one remnant at the mouth. And I remember in 2009 and 10 and 11, you could see it. And in 2014, apparently the floods they said pushed it out. Others said pushed it out and covered it up. There's rumors that someone hooked a cable to it to drug out to sea, but who knows? But it's definitely not there anymore. I mean, it used to be a public toilet. I had one of my friends was taking some photos of the tank one time, and he got confronted by some males and said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm just taking photos of photos." They go, Oh, okay. We just make sure because that's the woman's toilet. Yeah, I didn't mean that, buddy.
That's
Yeah,
amazing. Well, yeah, I remember that vividly as the one artifact at Matanikau that was still there. I remember seeing it, and it's a very rare Japanese tank. So I hope it's still there. Perhaps one day, if the sands move a certain direction, it will be uncovered again. But that is a spectacular remnant of the battle. But the mouth of a river, it meanders, it changes, as you said.
yeah.
In the time that you've been on Guadalcanal, of course, there's other issues, unexploded ordnance, missing in action. Do you have any memories about discoveries of that nature in that vicinity or that are yet to be found? Of course, the Getchy Patrol, perhaps there are some trace of them there in that area that remain to this day or could be found.
Yeah, so I was the DPAA, which is Americans defense teams that go over and look for and locate missing remains of American servicemen. They do a great job. They now go at least once a year. I've been there with them on a few sites, seen them doing their great work. So that's a constant commitment from them. The Japanese, generally mainly civilian organizations. I mean, I'm in contact with them. They go once a year to find the remains of the Japanese. So the remains are everywhere. There's still Americans missing there, and as you can imagine, a lot of Japanese still missing there. Unexploded ordnance is one of the major problems, because you can imagine living on a battlefield. And when I discussed earlier about encroachment up to the ridges, they uncovered more ordnance because it became a training. I have all the training range maps too, and especially 44 and 45, a lot of those hills became firing ranges. Naval gunfire and heavy artillery. And then the amount of ordnance dropped during the battlefields, and then the amount of ordnance there when it was logistical base, you can just imagine there's this unexploded ordnance everywhere. So that's a major concern for the Solomon Islands people. So have a real good team from the police there, Royal Solomon Islands Police. They have a good bomb disposal team. And the Americans and the Australians, New Zealanders, they come in regularly and conduct operations. I think there's a civilian group, sponsored by the U.S., who actually do that too. But it's a big problem. There are unfortunately deaths and injuries from these. And on my time there, I've seen death and injuries. Coming across exploding ordnance, and just look at my YouTube channel, Walking a Battlefield, I've always come across exploded ordnance. I have a background as a police bomb technician, so I don't touch, tilt, and tamper generally. I'll mark them, and then I call my friends the bombs disposal, and they deal with it. Unfortunately, being a third world country, there's tourists there who want to have relics, which on the surface that's good, but they don't know, I think, below the surface, that what that causes, especially children, to go and dig around these battlefields. And I've been to jobs as a police officer there where children have been seriously injured from doing that, because they know if they can present a bullet or a button or a buckle to a tourist, they'll get money. You tell them not to do it, but then they say their friends doing it and getting money. So unfortunately, that's third world country, and that's just the way it goes. So I'll try to dissuade that, due to the fact I want to protect these children. And adults, yes, they should know better, but once again, they make fish bombs and things like that, and they blow their arms off and all that. But yeah, this is a very serious issue over there, and that's very prevalent in the Solomon Islands mind. And unfortunately, they blame the United States. And even they say it's not an anti-U.S. sentiment, but they don't remember the war. Most of them is a young population. They just know that there's things there that's going to kill them and their family, and they go, these American bombs, and they just blame the Americans. They don't have any semblance of what really went on there. They just know there was a fight.
Exactly. And unfortunately, numerically speaking, percentage-wise, most of the ordnance that remains today is United States. Some Japanese stuff, but because of the base era as well, it's mostly American. So yeah, that's a very important piece of the battlefield today. And I concur with you completely about the locals being influenced to recover things to try to sell to tourists, and unfortunately, the behavior of tourists to try and collect this stuff instead of leaving only footprints and taking pictures. But I guess it's safe to say for people should read your book and understand and appreciate the history there. And perhaps as word of this great work spreads, there'll be increased interest in Matanikau and maybe even clean up the sandbar area. So there you go. And, Dave, as we wrap up, we could talk all day, but I wanted to pivot and say, is there anything else you wanted to add and share? You mentioned your Facebook page, your YouTube channel, both are superb. Tell a little bit about those and your engagement on social media to bring this history alive every single day.
Yeah, so I've got my YouTube channel. Originally, I designed my YouTube channel. I walk the battlefields. I'm basically, someone said it's like a no frills. It's a pure history with no frills. And I said, yes, no frills, because I don't have the technology to put it on. Because when I was filming, most of that was on an iPhone 5 camera. And I had to go back and I was editing it on an iPhone 5 camera. And then had to upload it on Solomon Islands internet. So it's luckily we even got anything. But yeah, so basically taking the viewer around, like me and the viewer walking around, and it's pretty raw footage, and I'm walking around, but I'm talking about the battlefields, and I go off the beaten path a bit. So I initially started that. My wife says, "Oh, you should do a Facebook page to accompany that." And I go, "Oh, I'm too busy with this." But what's happened? It's kind of flipped. My YouTube channel will get much traction because I'm not putting much effort. No, I'll say effort. I'm not there walking all the time. I go once a year and I'll try to update it. But my Facebook has got a lot of traction. I post twice a day on that. And you'll see I have a lot of interaction with the viewers, and I help out people on it. For example, if someone says, "Look, my dad was in the Marines there, but I don't know what unit," and I have access to the muster records and database, and I can quickly search real quick. And plus my knowledge of the campaign. If they say, "Oh, your dad was in 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines," and then I know off the top of my head where every unit, American unit on Guadalcanal, and Japanese basically too, fought on every day where they were at, all for this 6-month campaign. I can tell you right now off the top of my head if you ask me units. I mean, how much of a Guadalcanal geek I am, but 2 years of studying this stuff, deep, writing 2 books, and I'll talk about the second book later. But yeah, so I do that and I try to keep new material, make it very factual. And on my site, you won't find any modern politics. It's almost like you come into the door, you leave all that to the side. We're all together, and we're just having interest in Guadalcanal mainly, and that's it. And if someone says I run my site like an old Marine sergeant, I do. I mean, I don't put up with crap. I mean, because basically I started with 1 follower, my wife, so I'm happy to have no follower. But I have a good group of followers, and they're very smart people in there. And I think the reputation has grown. It's not a BS site, and if you really want good history there. And things like I do a lot of myth busting. Guadalcanal, I talk about Page and Barcelona and all kind of stuff on there. And I provide a lot of, firsthand material you won't find anywhere else. So yeah, I'm very proud of the Facebook site. So it's really, really neat.
Absolutely. Well, I encourage everybody to check it out on Facebook and your YouTube page. Follow, and I'm impressed. You are on there every day. So fighting the campaign every day.
Yeah, it gets frustrating at times. Yeah, but
absolutely. That's right. Well, you mentioned and alluded to another project. Is there anything that you want to share about what's next for you? Are you going back to the armchair or back to the computer to write and research? What's next, Dave?
Well, I've been stuck into it. I think I got into the habit as soon as I finished the first book. I thought, well, there's a lot here for a second book. And I talked about it earlier about the whole U.S. Army myth and the lack of attention across the whole Pacific. We're actually seeing some traction now. John McManus had a great trilogy, and I think Stephen Taft's got a new one out on the Pacific Division. So there's they're starting to get a bit of acknowledgement. And I thought, well, it definitely needs one on Guadalcanal because there's only been 1 book. I mentioned before Miller's official book. I keep saying blue. Blue was the World War I series. I think it's the green books.
Yeah, the green ones. Yep.
screen. So it's a great book, but once again, it's written in 1949. He used a lot of good research, but a lot of materials come forth since 1949, as you can imagine. So we definitely need a book on that. And plus, in my book, you'll see how I go from operational, then I'll go straight down to tactical, then I'll go back up to operational. And I have a lot of first-hand accounts in my books, and try to use the personal account from the Japanese side and the soldiers or the Marine sides. And I try to integrate that in to make it more readable. And plus, I like the first-hand accounts that tell stories, so a reader can connect. But I thought there's definitely enough material here for the Army. And plus, too, even though that's my next project, in fact, I finished writing it. I'm just need to do the conclusion and clean it up. And now I've got a book proposal, and it's going out. So hopefully this time next year I'll have a book of the U.S. Army on Guadalcanal. But it also, when I say U.S. Army, it also features the Marines in certain battles that's not really covered elsewhere, like the Battle of Coley Point, a very important battle, which is kind of, once again, like Matanikau, kind of glossed over and not went into a lot of detail. And then it's like my current book, in writing it, I uncovered a lot of new material, especially from the Army side, that I've never read before. And now started amazing me. Geez, I'm learning stuff here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, congratulations, I guess, and fingers crossed. It sounds like you'll have to be back on again anytime. Would love to talk about that project when it's ready. And anytime, Dave, you want to chat. I've never met you yet in person. We have, hopefully we'll meet on Guadalcanal one day in the future, but I respect and admire your work very much. This book was an awesome read. I can't wait to get a hardcover copy. And for anybody interested, check out the link in the description. The book is available. It's starting to ship now from Amazon and worldwide. Yep.
Yeah, it can be. You can go through any popular book site. I think Casemate, the publisher, starts shipping them in the 20th, but you can go through Barnes and Noble, thrift books. Just Google it in, and it's just all kind of different ways you can order it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, if you will, you've got a copy there. Can you go to page 206? Probably my favorite line in the book was in your conclusion, the sentence that starts, "A Marine officer expressed what it meant." And I think that's a fitting way to close things out about the significance of the Matanikau. So please, Dave, from your work, Guadalcanal's longest fight.
Yeah, so a Marine officer expressed what the river meant. We had a saying after we left the canal and went to Australia. As new officers joined the outfit, we used to say to them, "You're not a man until you cross the Matanikau 3 times."
Incredible. Dave Holland, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book. Keep it up, and looking forward to many more. This is a great work, an important work, and I'm just proud to talk to you about it and do whatever we can to help support it. So looking forward to seeing how it goes and reading your future research and following every day on walking a battlefield. Thank you, Dave.
Man, thank you, Justin. Thank you.